Bernie lay on the cold metal cot that formed the sole concession to comfort in the Ashton City jail, the dull hum of fluorescent lights overhead, barely masking the low rumble of voices echoing off the concrete walls. She stared up at the ceiling, the chipped paint forming strange constellations in the darkness, and tried to piece together the events that had led her here. Once the intrepid reporter about town, now she was trapped among the cast-offs of last night's festival, a motley crew of drunks, dopers, prostitutes, vandals, and every shade of trouble that had converged on Ashton once the festival's temporary glitter had faded. The cell was crowded, every spare inch of bench and floor claimed by a body or a makeshift pillow of rolled-up jacket or backpack. The sharp scent of sweat and stale beer mingled with the faint aroma of cheap perfume. Some of the younger men, eyes glazed and restless, had assembled an impromptu poker game, using cigarettes in place of cash. The butts traded like gold as they tried to pass the time. With an odd show of bravado, they slammed their hands onto the scarred wooden table, their spread fingers daring each other with the age-old knife game, testing courage, or perhaps simply seeking distraction from the reality closing in on them. Bernie's notebook and camera, her shields and weapons, had been confiscated at the processing desk. She felt naked without them, no longer the chronicler, but another statistic behind the bars. The only thing they hadn't taken was her mind, and so she set about recording everything, filing away scenes and snippets of conversation as best she could. Soon, she thought, the details might matter. The patterns might emerge, the truth might surface. Marshall Hogan, the newspaper's editor and Bernie's one-time mentor, had always preached the value of observation. "Truth doesn't just show up on your front porch, Bernie," he'd said, pounding his desk for emphasis. "Sometimes you gotta hunt it down, even if that means tracking it into a swamp." Bernie grinned ruefully to herself. Well, what was this if not a swamp? A heavy-set man with a sailor's tattoo along his forearm hunched nearby, snoring through lips parted in an uneven line. Against the far wall, a pair of women in two bright dresses exchanged whispered words, careful to keep their voices low as they traded stories and comfort. The younger of the two rubbed at a fresh bruise on her arm, remnants, Bernie guessed, of a rough arrest. Elsewhere, the poker game intensified. One man's laughter rang out loud and desperate as he lost a week's supply of smokes in a quick, careless hand. The room periodically erupted into shouts, the guards outside the bars banging their batons against the door to demand quiet. Overhead, the clock ticked in sluggish, uneven beats. Morning seemed impossibly far away. Bernie's thoughts drifted, unbidden, to the events of the festival. The memory was a fever dream. Colored lights reflected in puddles, the air thick with the music of carnival rides and the cries of hawkers vying for attention. Crowds surged through Ashton's otherwise quiet streets, bringing with them a tidal wave of energy and, beneath the chaos, a darker current. The brewing trouble that had long threatened to surface. That trouble had arrived in full force around midnight. The police had swept through the crowds, cracking down on any behavior that smacked of disorder. In their zeal to restore Ashton's reputation, or perhaps to present an illusion of control, they had rounded up everyone, from the truly violent to the merely unlucky. Bernie, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, found herself jammed into the paddy wagon alongside a handful of familiar faces, the festival's hangers-on, the notorious, the forgotten. Now, crammed behind bars, she watched as the lines between outcast and ordinary blurred. The woman with the bruise had once been the star performer at the local cabaret. The man with trembling fingers had once fixed Bernie's typewriter when it jammed at the press room. Here in the uniform darkness, the distinctions seemed to dissolve. Uneasy alliances formed as the evening dragged on. An older man with a poet's eyes recited doggerel to soothe a weeping girl, while the hand-slapping laughter of the poker players provided a ragged soundtrack to the waiting. One young man, too frightened or stubborn to join the games, huddled in the corner, fingering a dog-eared tract from some street preacher. Another, emboldened by boredom and bravado, regaled his neighbors with increasingly wild tales of criminal exploits, drawing the occasional groan or cheer from the assembled crowd. Bernie found herself listening, absorbing, and filing away observations for later. She noted the way people revealed themselves under pressure, the kindness that surfaced amid despair, the cynicism, the hardening or softening of edges. Each story was a thread, waiting to be woven into something larger. Perhaps that was the true work of a reporter, piecing together the fragments, bearing witness to lives at the margins. In the brief moments of quiet, she could hear the distant sounds of the town, sirens fading into the night, the hum of cars traveling empty streets. Somewhere beyond these walls, Marshall would be searching for answers, pulling whatever strings he could to get his reporter released, to find out what had happened on that night when Ashton's shadows had spilled from every alley and lane. Bernie closed her eyes, exhaustion finally threatening to drag her under. But as she drifted, she promised herself she would remember it all. The stories, the faces, the way hope sparked even in the deepest gloom. She would capture it, shape it, and share it. So the darkness that had swept through Ashton could not simply be washed away or forgotten. Behind these bars, Bernie was no longer just a reporter. She was a witness to the battle between light and shadow, a battle that, in some small way, each person in this cell had fought in their own fashion. The hours stretched ahead. The game of cigarettes faltered, the laughter faded, and a heavy silence descended. But Bernie remained alert, knowing the morning would bring questions, and with them perhaps the chance for answers, for reckoning, for redemption. In the end, all that remained was the darkness, and Bernie's silent vow to be its chronicler, its challenger, its witness, until the light came again.